Can you see it properly? One second. Okay. So it's a little bit of a change of scale with the previous presentation. I mean, mine will not be technical at all. It's more about the urban heritage in general. I myself am an urban heritage specialist and now specializing in sustainable development. And I started working in Bahrain in 2010 on the development of Muharraq as a World Heritage Site. So I would like to first talk briefly about the history of the development of cities in the Arabian Gulf in general, to be able to explain why our interventions are the way they are now today in Muharraq. So historically, there was very little, perennial architecture in the Gulf. Mainly, the structures were made of materials that were not supposed to last very long. Bahrain, as you can see in the Gulf, was a place of exchange. It was a place of commerce, a link between the Indian Ocean and Mesopotamia. And because of this role, it kept, and the small size of the country and the lack of sweet water in the region, the cities there would appear and disappear depending on the presence of political powers or strong influencing political powers. So as I said, the material for construction was mainly palm fronds up till the end, up to the, let's say, early 19th century. Palm frond was because that was material that was available locally from the palm trees, was used mostly. But then with the political and regional developments of trade through the East India Company and other changes in industry and the Industrial Revolution, there was a development of the pearling trade in Bahrain, but also in Muharraq specifically, the town that we are working on. And this led to an appearance of an architecture, which is known typically as the Gulf architecture, which is still can be titled a vernacular architecture, despite the technological changes of the time. And this is so it's an architecture that is, can you see the full screen, or because I still can see?
Yes, we see the full screen.
Full screen, okay, good, because I see that. As you can see, typically this architecture is made of coral stone, which is a material from the sea, and then originally using for the ceilings, also palm trunks from the palm trees. But with the expansion of trade, the materials used for wood were imported from India and from Africa. So the ceilings were progressively made of mangrove poles from India, but the main construction material was stone up until the 1930s. Another characteristic of this architecture is that it uses the wind to its advantage as much as possible, because in this region there's a huge problem of humidity and heat. As you know, summers are really hot and the humidity can reach 90%. So as you can see in the walls and any parapet, any vertical element in the house, there used to be all sorts of ventilation elements which would allow the wind to come in, but not necessarily light and vision. So, and this is there's a very rich vocabulary in these openings in Bahrain, in this traditional architecture. Sorry. This is a photo of Manama in the 60s, a typical market street where you can observe this stone architecture and also the light elements for shading, which were used at the time. And this is also in the 60s where things started to develop, but There was a sort of transitional architecture, so we start seeing new shapes, but are still an evolution of the traditional architecture. So I'm focusing a bit more on Muharraq. An important factor was that, and also the rest of Bahrain, the relation with the sea was very strong. So this is what Bahrain was a sea economy primarily. It relied on commerce, as I said, but it also relied on fishing and on pearl fishing, the pearling economy. So the relation with the sea is crucial, and this can still be observed today because actually it influenced how the real estate, or I would say the cadastral system evolved. And we have a lot of private plots today, which are plots in the sea. That shows how that the sea was kind of how valuable it was. So the plots in the sea were actually privatized. But regarding the evolution of Muharraq itself, the relation with the sea was visible through small reclamation of the sea, through building these sort of warehouses and shops on the sea itself, receiving merchandise and then distributing it in the town. This is why we can observe a sort of comb-shaped seashore profile over time as the city developed. And this is what I'm highlighting here. And the rest of the city actually had the typical distribution of an Arabian Oriental city. But going back to Muharraq a bit more closely, so this here shows the souk, the spine, and how then it communicated with the inside the parts of the town, which was the central, I would say the center of the town. As I said, the interior of the city was made of this typical fabric of courtyards. Of course, the courtyard house is the typical house that was still present in the region, and it allowed to create a microclimate in the courtyard and allow to alleviate the effects of heat and humidity. The towns also preserved the economical system until the 60s. So we have to understand how these towns came to be. They came to be because of tribes who settled there due to the economic development. And these tribes typically used to install, first of all, a main house, and then eventually had their own mosque, and then it had their own outdoor majlis. A majlis is a place where the family meets and where members of the community meet. So this created sort of a nucleus of a neighborhood, and typically the neighborhood name was Farij. Farij also in Arabic means a team. So it has this double meaning of team, group of people, community, and also a place. This is an inside interior of a majlis, a typical interior of a majlis, and this one is actually part of the site that we are developing, but I'll talk about that a bit later. Going back to the evolution of urban masses, just to give you an idea of how cities developed in Bahrain, and specifically Muharraq and Manama, which are the main two cities in Bahrain. I'm just going to go through the maps to show the evolution of the urban mass. And this is in 1968, and you can see here how cities were still isolated, well defined, and then the rest, all this in yellow, is agriculture. And then in 2000, this is a photo of 2015 showing how dramatic changes occurred, and now we have very little green spaces. And this also heritage of green and archaeology was lost by the extreme urban development in 2015, namely also due to the overexploitation of the underground water in the 1960s and 1970s. So this is also another map showing the layers of the reclamation history in Muharraq and in Bahrain, and this one shows specifically around Muharraq how the seashore was lost. So this relation that I talked about, this privilegeous relation with the sea, and the sea economy got lost after extensive reclamation took place from the 70s onwards. Morphologically also, from the 90s onwards, the historical houses that I explained, the stone houses, started being demolished because they were considered to be dangerous. So we started to have a lot of gaps in the city. As you can see in this these comparative maps, we started to have voids, which also affect how the pattern of the city as the small narrow lanes used to work as a way to also fight humidity and heat. So now we don't have these. We have less of these narrow lanes. So the effect of heat and humidity was worse with time. And also the traditional architecture also transformed, of course, with modernization. In the 70s to today, and rather than integrating the elements that made it climatically viable, as I talked about, now we just have a skeleton that is supporting all the techniques which give the interior comfort. Of course, they are much more efficient at doing that. And this is, of course, I'm not explaining anything new. This is a phenomena that happened everywhere. But it was interesting in the case of Bahrain and Muharraq to see how it happened over a very short period of time, within basically 50 years. This is also showing the transformation of the courtyard into a type of home which still has the division, the distribution of spaces as in the original or old maps, but now it is a covered area. So the courtyard, which is in the middle, is now a covered area. It still distributes spaces around it, but it is no longer the courtyard, which used to be to hold the microclimate to cool the house. Everything here is, of course, in the new typology. It has climatic cooling, AC, air conditioning. So these are photos also that show the transformation from the 50s to the 90s. And this just to illustrate what I said earlier, that this transformation happened in a very short time. So we went from a traditional system of technological traditional system to a technological system without actually going through a classic system. This is inspired from the technology theory. I forgot exactly who developed this theory, but that's the inspiration from the theory on technology, on the history of technology. So in the 2000s, the cities are sealed from the sea, and this is where a new awareness of the importance of heritage comes to surface during the 2000s. So we have a series of heritage-led development initiatives that take place in the Arabian Gulf in general. This is an example of one in Qatar, where the souk was basically rebuilt, but with taking a lot of liberty in reinterpreting how it used to be. So the photo on the right shows how it was redeveloped, adding all sorts of details and elements and lighting elements which are not authentic, but kind of bringing back a lively place, which is very well appreciated by tourists and by people who are living there, but has little to do with the actual the way the place actually was, or with the local culture, which is not expressed so much anymore. Another example is the development in Sharjah in the UAE, which is, we can call it revivalism, which is also happening through the demolition of an existing neighborhood, and the neighborhood that developed in the 80s, 90s, being demolished to rebuild also the old city, to bring back the old town. This is a huge project happening on several phases in Sharjah. Also, I mean, lacking, of course, the authenticity because these houses are not there anymore. And there's a sort of you can call it museumification, or you can call it touristification, by creating an attraction point that has heritage as a theme, but maybe lacks also, the community, the original community, which used to live there, and a certain authenticity. In Bahrain, I would say, so the initiatives are different because the heritage was not completely lost to start with, and the communities that live there are not completely lost. There is still, it still can be considered a living city. So the original street pattern is there. 50% of the local population is Bahraini, but also there's another percentage of the population from South Asian origins, which also is living kind of a simple life. We could call it authentic life in the narrow streets of Muharraq. There is still intangible traditions such as the one of folk music, which are still taking place in Muharraq. There's also a lot of houses made of stone. I would say around, I think, 20% of the houses are still in stone and can still have the value. So this Muharraq now is also an opportunity to, reinstate a sort of sustainable living by preserving what is there and building on that to have a new option of living sustainably. So from 2000 onwards, there was a series of initiatives, first started by the private sector, by a private NGO, headed by Sheikh Hamay Al Khalifa, and then continued, I would say, by the Ministry of Culture in Bahrain. And the point of it was to regenerate the town, as I said, by conserving and bringing back communities who are interested to live in these kind of places, preferably Bahraini communities, but also other ones. So I would say the main points that took place since then are that we are aiming to preserve the original street pattern and enhance the accessibility through coordinating development projects with concerned authorities. What we also do, so we have these projects to develop the town, but we also have a system of regulations through which we review any construction, any development project in the town. We are kind of the monitoring unit at the Bahrain Authority for Culture for any development project in the city. What we also do is of course, we are restoring and adapting the most important historical buildings through this Perling pathway, which is the World Heritage Site that was inscribed in Muharraq, which is a series of 16 houses that we are restoring. And this is just an example of how much attention we are giving to, so that relates back a little bit to the first presentation, but I can talk a lot about this. Ask me questions if you want, but there's a lot of challenges in conserving the heritage fabric in Muharraq because of the humidity mainly and the presence of termite and many issues relating to the construction system itself, which is not very robust, as I said in the beginning. I'll just go slowly. And then one also major aspect of the development is to create these public spaces and to take advantage of open spaces abandoned, which the hollow spaces that I talked about previously, to take advantage of the hollow spaces to create, to adapt them into either public spaces or parking spaces. And these public spaces now are completed. There are 16 of them in Muharraq. This picture is a bit old, but there's another one. I'll just go, sorry. So this one shows one of them, which is today being used by the community. This is a photo of a gathering that was specifically made to celebrate the Muharrak's success in the Asian Cup, I think. So the community gathered in these spaces, and they use them a lot for, to celebrate sometimes weddings, sometimes other events. But going back to this point, so reconnecting the city with the sea, this is a very important point also, because as I said, losing this connection with the sea was heavily affected the value of the city in general. So we kind of wanted to also have this connection, a pedestrian connection between, this is a historic fort on the seashore, which was also part of the World Heritage Site. And we created a pedestrian bridge that connected it with the rest of the city. And of course, in 2019, all this effort led to the project being awarded the Ghassan Award for Architecture, which we are very proud of. And now I'll just go through a series of projects that were implemented in this regeneration effort. The Milan Pavilion was Bahrain's participation in the Expo 2014. And it was, the concept builds back on this history of courtyards, as I said, and how the greenery was integrated inside the houses and the kind of morphology it created. And the theme of the pavilion was the archaeological history of Bahrain as an agricultural, archaeology. So the history of the agricultural heritage of Bahrain. As I explained earlier, Bahrain had one of the oldest agricultural lands in the world, but it was lost due to overexploitation. And these are other pictures of that pavilion. The pavilion was, of course, installed in Milan first for the Expo, and then was transported in Muharrak, where it is now. That's why I'm showing the pictures, because now, today, it's part of the fabric of Muharrak, and it's part of the regeneration. Other photos. And then there was also the development of the Muharrak Souk using, so of course, to just explain, so we are restoring, but as I said, we also have the development and taking opportunities of gaps and open spaces in the city to develop a new architecture. We're not, our philosophy is not to copy the traditional architecture or try to create an architecture that would not have the authentic, that would use the traditional language, but would not be authentic. So when we rebuild, when we develop a new space, we kind of rely on a new language. But this language, as you can see, also is inspired by the materiality of the stone and of the traditional architecture. This is another project, which is the biggest project that we have developed. It's the visitor center of the World Heritage Site, which is now in Muharrak. And it also builds on the morphology of the shape of the city. And its original idea was to create a canopy over an archaeological site. As you can see here on the left, there's an archaeological site which the canopy protects. And the morphology, again, is inspired by the morphology of historical cities. This is other photos of the interior spaces of that building. And this is also another new development, which is a dar. We call it a dar, but it's a music center, which hosts concerts of traditional music every week. and it's also embedded in the fabric, as you can see on the photo on the right. It is very popular when it plays music. The people sit around it and can just listen to the traditional folk music, which is a folk music inspired from the songs of the pearling divers during the history, during the pearling economy. This is another project which is partly restoration. Of course, the old part is restored as is. I can also talk about the values, but this is a huge subject. But also the development on the left is a modern structure. This project now changed a little bit. Doesn't look the same. This is another one. So whenever we have these open areas where we can develop a new language, let's say, we don't copy the existing. We just support creativity. And this is a project of parking structures, which is currently being implemented also in the city to support accessibility to the city, because one of the main issues of old towns, as you probably know, is the lack of accessibility. So finally, to conclude, just a few points on lessons learned. Through my experience and our experience in working on this project, I think it's very important to understand the history and character of the place in order to be able to develop or to put together a plan for regeneration. And it's important, I think, to keep a balance between conservation and innovation, not to, so conservation is about keeping the authenticity, but innovation is also about allowing creativity to enhance the place. It's very important to look at the community and to see what they need and to try to support that. Develop initiatives also adapted to the local conditions. And I put HUL approach between brackets because HUL is the historic urban landscape approach, which is now the approach that is preferred by the World Heritage Convention and by UNESCO for urban regeneration. And I think these 3 points kind of fit in this approach, which is based on looking at what you have, what are the qualities that a certain place has, and building on that, rather than coming with approaches that are decided by, from the top down. Now, further objectives, I think, of course, we have to think more about having the community involved in decision making, because the dialogue with the community is sometimes interrupted by some decisions which are not sourced with them. So I think it's important to enhance the dialogue with the community and also think about the economic viability of the project. We know that the development will have indirect economical impacts, but we need to measure them a little bit further. So I just wanted to highlight these 2 points, and that's it for me. Thank you.